Have you ever watched a man get hurt just for the crime of walking into a room? Not for something he did, not for something he said, just for being new, being quiet, being the kind of person other people decide is safe to hurt. Keep that question in your head because in about 10 minutes it's going to matter more than you think. The slap landed like a gunshot. Flat, open-palmed, loud enough that the whole exercise yard at Holloway Ridge Penitentiary went silent at once, the way a bar goes silent when a glass shatters. 60 men stopped what they were doing. The weight stacks stopped clanking. The card game near the fence froze mid-deal. "Welcome home, rookie," the big man said. He was grinning. "Smile when I talk to you." The new inmate's head had turned sideways from the force of it. Slowly, without a sound, he brought it back to center. His cheek was already blooming red under the harsh morning light. He didn't touch it. He didn't step back. He just looked at the man in front of him with a stillness that, if anyone in that yard had known how to read it, would have emptied the place in seconds. He said nothing. "Oh, I love the quiet ones," the big man said, leaning in close enough that the new inmate could smell cigarettes and cheap coffee on his breath. Quiet ones snap the prettiest. Up on the guard walk, an officer leaned against the rail with his keys hanging off one finger. He watched the whole thing. Then, the way a man looks away from something he's seen 1,000 times, he turned his eyes to the far corner of the yard and studied the razor wire like it was suddenly fascinating. The new inmate breathed out, slow and controlled, through his nose. And down at his side, hidden by the loose gray sleeve of his prison uniform, his right hand had curled itself closed, not in fear, not in a panic. It closed the way it used to close in a locker room, the way it closed when a cornerman was wrapping tape around each knuckle, before a bell. It closed, with memory in it. Those knuckles had ended arguments faster than most men could form a thought. He felt the fist tighten. He felt every old instinct wake up and start whispering. And then, deliberately, one finger at a time, he made himself let it open. Not yet, he told himself. Not here. Not for this. His name was Marcus Duvall, and 9 days ago he had been one of the best fighters most people in this country had never gotten the chance to hear about. Holloway Ridge sat 90 miles from the nearest real town, tucked into a fold of dead brown hills where the wind never stopped and the water tasted like pennies. To get to it, you drove past a shuttered mine, a boarded church, and one gas station that closed at 6. Then you crossed a bridge over a dry riverbed, passed through 2 chain-link gates and a wall of coiled wire, and you were inside. The place held around 1,100 men. Sound did strange things behind those walls. A whisper in one cell could travel the length of a tier. A cough could echo like a slammed door. Men learned fast that in Holloway Ridge, silence itself was a kind of money. You spent it carefully. You saved it when you could. And you never ever gave it away. For free. Marcus had learned that in his first 48 hours. He learned a lot of things fast. He was good at watching. He'd always been good at watching. It was the thing that had made him great in the ring, long before the punching ever mattered. Because before all of this, Marcus Duvall had been the state super lightweight champion. 22 wins, 0 losses. 16 of those wins finished early, the other man's corner throwing in the towel before things got ugly. Trainers 3 states away knew his name. A manager once flew in on a red eye and slid a contract across a table in a late-night diner, a number printed on it with more zeros than Marcus had ever seen attached to his own life, a signing bonus, a gym in his name, a fight in Vegas before the year was out. Marcus read it twice. Then he folded it neatly in half and slid it back across the table. "My mom's sick," he said. "I'm not leaving her to go chase a belt in a desert. She had a cancer with a long, ugly name and a short timeline. The treatments cost more in a month than Marcus made in a year, so he did what a lot of quiet, strong people do. He took the night shift at a distribution warehouse off the county highway, loading trucks, until his shoulders sang. He trained at 5 in the morning before his hands stopped aching from the night before, and in the hours between he sat in a hospital chair holding his mother's hand while machines counted her heartbeats out loud. He told himself the title would keep. Titles always keep. Mothers don't. Then came the night that ended everything, and the terrible part was that Marcus hadn't been anywhere near it. A check cashing store 4 blocks from his gym got robbed at knife point just after midnight. The clerk, shaken and scared, described the man who did it. Tall, black, athletic build, moved fast. Marcus was tall. Marcus was black. Marcus had spent 15 years building an athletic build, 1 round at a time. The store's camera footage was a smear of gray static. The photo lineup was thrown together in a hurry, and the public defender assigned to him was carrying so many files that year that he mixed up Marcus's court date twice. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The judge handed down 7 years. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't slam the table. He didn't even look at the jury. He looked down at his own 2 hands, the ones that had earned him everything and cost him nothing until now, and in the quiet of that courtroom he made himself a promise that he intended to keep no matter what happened on the inside. In there, the hands stay down. One swing behind those walls, even a righteous one, even one thrown to save his own life, could turn 7 years into 15. He would not give them the excuse. He would eat what they served him, keep his head low, do his time, and walk back out into the daylight to sit in that hospital chair again, while there was still someone in the bed who knew his face. That was the entire plan. Survive quietly. Go home. The plan lasted 9 days. The reason it lasted only 9 days had a name, and the name was Deacon Rourke. Rourke ran Tier C at Holloway Ridge the way a warlord runs a stretch of border. He was 6'5" and built like a loading dock, with a shaved head, a neck wider than his jaw, and forearms marked up with the kind of homemade ink that tells a story you don't want to hear the ending of. He'd been inside 11 years for beating a man half to death over a $50 debt, and in that time he'd turned the tier into his personal economy. He liked new arrivals best. He called them rent. When a fresh man came through intake, Rourke let him settle for a day, maybe 2, just long enough to start hoping this place might be survivable. Then he came collecting. Commissary, phone minutes, the good shoes. And when a man had nothing material left to give, Rourke took the last thing, the fear itself, and he kept it like a trophy, feeding on it a little every day. What made Rourke more than just a big man with bad habits was a correctional officer named Ellis Pryor. Pryor worked the Tier C floor. He was thin where Rourke was thick, with a flat gray face and eyes that never seemed to land on anything long enough to be responsible for it. He and Rourke had never signed anything, never shook on anything. They had an understanding built entirely out of nods and absences. When Rourke came collecting, Pryor found paperwork at the far desk. When something was about to happen that a camera shouldn't catch, Pryor suddenly remembered a hallway that needed walking on the other side of the block. Rourke kept the tier quiet. No riots, no complaints, no headaches for anyone above him. And in exchange, Pryor's incident reports always ended with the same 3 words: all secure, uneventful. So when Rourke slapped the new man across the yard that first morning, he was following a script that had worked dozens of times. Slap the rookie. Watch him flinch. Watch him fold. Watch him start paying rent. He looked at Marcus Duvall and saw a slim, quiet black man with lowered eyes, and his whole body read one word off him: easy. The entire tier read the same word. They were all staring at the surface and missing everything underneath it. They saw a bowed head and read defeat. They didn't see what the stillness actually was, that particular calm that isn't surrender at all. It's a fighter between rounds. It's a man on a stool, breathing, listening to his corner, counting, waiting for the bell he chooses, not the one somebody throws at him. Nobody in Holloway Ridge knew that the quiet man's hands had once been insured for more money than Ellis Pryor would earn his entire career. Nobody knew about the 22 wins, the 16 stoppages, the reflexes drilled so deep into muscle that they fired a full half-second before conscious thought. They saw a target. They were looking at the wrong man entirely. That first night, Marcus lay on his bunk and listened to Rourke's laugh roll down the tier like a slow tide. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone, thinner every single call now, and how she always ended with, "Are you eating enough, baby?" as if he were the one they should be worried about. He thought about the promise. He did not yet know that keeping it was about to cost him nearly everything he had left. The chow hall at Holloway Ridge ran on a set of rules that nobody had ever written down. Where you sat, who you could look at, how many seconds you were allowed to hold another man's eyes before it became a challenge. Marcus learned them by watching, the same way he'd once learned an opponent's tells from 3 rows back at a weigh-in. On the third day, he found a corner seat with his back to the wall and set his tray down in front of him. Gray meatloaf, 2 slices of soft white bread, a small carton of milk he was saving because his body still remembered it needed calcium, still thought there might be a fight to train for. He almost finished the meal in peace. Rourke came across the room slow, 2 of his crew drifting behind him like a shadow that had grown extra limbs. The hall noticed before Marcus did. Forks went quiet. Voices dropped. By the time the shadow fell across his tray, Marcus already knew who it belonged to. "You're in my spot," Rourke said. There were at least 30 empty seats in that room. Marcus didn't argue. He reached for his tray to move it. Rourke got there first. One big hand shot out and flipped it. The tray spun, and the meatloaf and the bread and the small carton of milk hit Marcus square in the chest before sliding down to slap onto the concrete floor. The carton burst open on the way down. White ran down the front of his gray shirt like something inside him had split. The hall laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the laughter became its own wall, and Marcus was standing alone inside it, dripping. "Clean it up," Rourke said pleasantly. "You made a mess in my house." Marcus looked at him for exactly 1 second, and in that single second, something moved behind his eyes, fast and cold, there and then gone, like a counterpunch a camera can't quite catch. Then he knelt. He gathered the bread. He wiped the milk off the floor with a napkin that came apart in his fingers. He did it without a single word, the way a man does a thing he has already decided he is going to survive. Rourke watched him do it, grinning, drinking it in. "Good boy," he said. 200 men in that room, and not one of them stood up. Not one said a word, because every man there had already done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic always came out the same. Crossing Deacon Rourke cost too much. It always had. Marcus carried the ruined tray to the bin. His hands didn't shake, and by the door, leaning in the frame with his arms folded across his chest, Officer Ellis Pryor watched all of it. When Rourke glanced his way, Pryor did the smallest thing a man can do. He nodded. The slap had been a test. The tray had been a message. What came after was a campaign, and Rourke ran it like a man who'd done it many times before, because he had. He understood power the way some men understand the weather. You don't take it all at once. You take it slow, in pieces, until the other man forgets he ever owned anything worth protecting. So Rourke started small and made it last. Night 1, Marcus came back to his cell and found his thin mattress dragged off the frame onto the floor, his sheet gone, and the 2 photographs he owned slid halfway under the bars with a boot print stamped across them. One was his mother on her porch, back when she still had her hair. Marcus picked it up. He wiped the dirt off her face with the pad of his thumb, slow, careful. He said nothing. Night 2, his commissary was gone. The soap, the stamps, the packets of instant coffee he'd bought with money that should have gone home. He found the empty wrappers lined up on his pillow in a neat little row, arranged like a signature. Night 3, they came for the letters. Marcus wrote his mother every single day. He waited on her replies the way a diver waits on the surface. Rourke figured this out because Rourke figured everything out, and after that, the letters simply stopped arriving. They piled up in some tray somewhere they had no business being, and Marcus sat through mail call every afternoon with an open, hopeful face that closed a little more each time his name wasn't called. Here is what Deacon Rourke saw from inside his own head. He saw a man breaking exactly, on schedule. He'd run this play so many times that he could feel its rhythm, and Marcus seemed to be moving to it perfectly. The bowed head, the flat voice, the way he flinched at nothing. To Rourke, silence had only ever meant one thing: fear. And fear was the sweetest thing the tier had to offer. He lay on his bunk at night, replaying the sound the tray made when it flipped, the white milk running down, and he smiled up at the ceiling. This one's going to break beautiful. He was reading the wrong man, because what looked like fear was discipline. It was 15 years of a corner man's voice in his ear. Stay calm. Don't load up. Don't chase. Wait for your round. Marcus wasn't shrinking. He was holding a line, and the line was a promise made to a woman in a hospital bed. Every night Rourke pushed. The line bent. Every night it did not break. By the fourth night, others joined in because cruelty is easier in a crowd, and Rourke had a crew of 5 men who fed off his scraps and feared his moods. They took turns. One shoulder-checked Marcus hard in the shower line, daring him to react. One dropped a used mop head into his food. One stood outside his cell at lights out and described in a low, patient voice all the things that eventually happen to men who think they're better than a place like this. Marcus took it the way a seawall takes weather, and Ellis Pryor watched it all happen and wrote all secure, uneventful. There was a camera at the end of the Tier C walk, mounted high in a steel cage where nobody could reach it. It saw almost everything it was supposed to see. But Pryor knew that cameras blind spots better than the warden did. He knew the exact angle near the shower room, that the lens couldn't quite bend around. He knew when maintenance logged the unit down for cleaning. And on the nights Rourke's crew got busy, Pryor found reports to file at the far desk with his back to the tier and his radio turned low. Once, a younger officer, still new enough to have a conscience with the wrapper on, asked him about it in the break room. "You see what's going on with the new guy in C? The champ-looking one?" Pryor didn't look up from his coffee. "I see a quiet tier," he said. "Quiet tier's a good tier. Don't go making it loud." The younger officer went quiet too. That's how it spreads. Then, on the 5th night, the phone call came. Marcus got 4 minutes on the tier phone. His aunt's voice came through small and tight, and he knew before she said the words. His mother had taken a turn. The treatment had stopped holding. The doctors were saying things now like comfort and time, words that meant the end was walking toward them, while Marcus stood behind 3 gates unable to move. "She keeps asking about you," his aunt said. "Every day. She just wants to know you're okay in there." Marcus shut his eyes. Down the tier, Rourke's laugh rolled toward him like surf. "Tell her I'm okay," Marcus said, and his voice did not shake. "Tell her I'm coming home. Tell her to wait for me." He hung up. He pressed his forehead against the cold cinder block and breathed. 4 counts in. 4 counts out. The way his trainer had taught him to breathe between rounds when his body was begging him to quit. One swing. That was all it would take to feel like a whole man again for exactly 1 second and then lose everything that had ever mattered. More years. More gates. His mother dying alone in a room he wasn't allowed into, all because he'd taught Deacon Rourke a lesson. Nobody in a courtroom would ever believe he'd had the right to teach. So he kept the hands down. Rourke found him there against the wall and read the posture as defeat. In his mind, this was the moment, the break he'd been farming for. He stepped in close and put his mouth near Marcus's ear. "You're getting it now," he murmured. "Couple more weeks. You'll be carrying my tray to the table. Maybe cleaning my boots. He patted Marcus's cheek twice. Soft. The worst kind of soft. Quiet boys make the best pets. In his head, Rourke was already counting the win. He pictured Marcus a month from now, hollowed out and useful, broken in like an old pair of gloves. He had never once considered the other possibility, that a man can be quiet because he is kind, that a man can be still because he is strong, that the difference between fear and control is completely invisible right up until the exact second it isn't. Marcus didn't move. He let Rourke walk away, laughing. But that night, lying on a mattress on the floor, he did something he hadn't done since the day they read his sentence. In the dark, he flexed his right hand, slow, one finger at a time, feeling the old machinery wake up and answer. Just checking, just in case. 2 cells down, the tier camera blinked its little red light at nothing at all. The library was the one honest quiet in Holloway Ridge. Rourke didn't read, so Rourke didn't go there. Marcus went for the silence, the only silence in the building that hadn't been stolen and resold. He found an old man already at the table. Gray beard, reading glasses pushed low, a battered paperback open in front of him. The old man watched Marcus sit and lay his hands flat on the wood, and something in his face lit up like a struck match. "I know those hands," he said. Marcus looked up. Silas Boone. The old man held out his own. "Cut man and trainer, 30 years before I did something stupid and ended up here." He tapped the table. "I watched you take the state title. 9th round. You dropped that boy from Tulsa with a check hook he never saw leave your shoulder." He chuckled to himself. "I was there, and I've been watching you walk this tier for a week and a half like a man holding his breath underwater." "I'm not here to fight," Marcus said quietly. "I know that too." Silas leaned in. "And that's exactly why they think you're weak. Out there, that discipline made you a champion. In here, son, it's killing you slow." He paused. "So what's the plan?" Marcus was quiet a long moment. "Keep my head down, do my time, get home to my mother while she's still here." "And if they won't let you keep your head down?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't answer because he didn't have one. Silas nodded slowly, the way a cornerman nods when the bell is a breath away. "Then you don't start it," he said. "But when it comes to you, and it's coming, boy, you finish it. Fast enough that the finishing is the mercy." Out in the corridor, the Count whistle blew. It happened on the 7th night. Marcus should have felt it in the small things. The crew went quiet at dinner. Rourke didn't touch his food, just sat across the hall watching Marcus with the patient, satisfied look of a man who has already set the trap and only has to wait for it to spring. And near the end of the tier, when the lights dimmed for the night count, Officer Ellis Pryor walked his slow walk to the far desk, sat down, and turned his back to Tier C. The shower room was the blind spot. Everyone knew it. The tier camera could not bend its lens into that tiled corner. No lens, no witness. Just water, concrete, and whatever a group of men decided to do in the dark. Marcus went to wash before lockdown. He heard the door swing shut behind him. He heard the bolt slide home. He turned, and there they were. 4 of them. Rourke in front, 2 of his crew fanned out to either side, a 5th by the door. And the man by the door had something in his hand, held low, half hidden. Marcus's eyes dropped to it on pure instinct, the way a fighter clocks a threat before he's decided it's won, and he saw what it was. A phone. Recording. They wanted this filmed. A trophy. A lesson to pass around the whole tier, hand to hand, screen to screen. Proof of what happens to men who don't break. "No more free rent," Rourke said. He cracked his knuckles, one hand, then the other. "Time you learned what we do to quiet boys who forget where they are." "You don't want to do this," Marcus said. His voice was flat and even. "Open the door, walk out. Nobody has to get hurt tonight." Rourke laughed. They all laughed. It was the last easy breath any of them would take. The first man came from the right, swinging a wild, looping haymaker telegraphed from across the room. To everyone who watched the video later, it looked like the man simply tripped and fell. To Marcus, time did the thing it had done since he was 15 and first stepped through the ropes. It slowed down. The punch came in like a lazy arc drawn in the air, and Marcus slipped it by an inch, not even a full step, just a tilt of the head, letting the fist sail past his ear. Then he answered with one short left hook to the body, right under the ribs, and the man folded around it like a coat sliding off a hook and hit the wet tile, gasping for air that wouldn't come. 1 second. The second man lunged before the first had even landed, grabbing for Marcus's collar with both hands. Marcus caught one wrist, turned his hips the way 16 years of road work and bag work had taught them to turn, and used the man's own weight to spin him hard into the wall. A short right uppercut met him on the way in. There was a sound, sharp and clean, and the second man slid down the tile and sat there against the wall, eyes drifting, not sure anymore where the ceiling was. 3 seconds. Then Rourke roared and charged, all 240 pounds of him, arms spread wide to crush and smother. This was the move he'd built 11 years on, the bull rush that had ended a dozen men against a dozen walls. Marcus didn't meet it. He pivoted off the line, light on his feet, and let the giant stumble past him into empty air, and as Rourke turned, off balance, momentum carrying him the wrong way, Marcus stepped in and threw the exact punch the old man in the library had named a week before. The check hook. Short. Tight. Perfect. Landing flush on the hinge of the jaw with the full turn of his body behind it. Rourke's knees stopped existing. He went down the way a demolished building goes down, slow at the very top and then all at once at the bottom, and he hit the floor so hard the standing water jumped an inch into the air. 7 seconds. The fifth man, the one filming his trophy, stopped recording Marcus and started recording his own retreat. He backed into the corner with his hand shaking, the camera still pointed forward because he'd forgotten how to lower it. "I'm out," he stammered. "I'm out, man. I'm out Marcus looked at him. He was breathing hard, chest rising and falling, water running off his fists, but his hands were already coming down on their own. He hadn't chased a single one of them. He hadn't thrown one punch that wasn't answering a punch first. Every blow had been the smallest thing required to stop the next threat, and not one thing more. "Then go," Marcus said. 12 seconds, start to finish. 4 men on the wet floor. 1 man standing, untouched, water dripping off his knuckles into the drain. And here is the part that the whole country would eventually replay in slow motion until the numbers stopped making sense. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't stand over Rourke's body. He didn't say one word of victory. Instead, he crossed to the second man, the one against the wall with the swimming eyes, knelt down and checked that he was breathing right. 2 fingers to the neck, a hand tilting the head so the airway stayed clear. Then he stood, reached over, and shut off the shower that was still running, and walked to the bolted door. He worked the bolt back with steady hands and stepped out into the tier, leaving the 4 of them groaning behind him in the dark. He thought it was over. It was only just beginning, because the fifth man's phone had caught all 12 seconds, every slip, every counter, the check hook that folded a giant. And then the thing that made it impossible for anyone to look away, the man who'd won kneeling down to make sure the man who came to hurt him could still breathe. The video left Holloway Ridge the next morning the way everything leaves a prison, hand to hand. And by nightfall, it was somewhere it could never be pulled back from. The internet did what the internet does. It caught fire. By the 3rd day, the clip had a name. People were calling it 12 seconds. It ran on phones, on subway cars, and in break rooms and on living room televisions in cities Marcus had never visited. Commentators broke it down frame by frame. A retired trainer pointed at a pause screen and said, "That is not a man brawling. That is a schooled professional. Look at the feet. Look how he never once moves forward. Strangers argued in comment sections 100,000 replies deep. Who was he? How does a man who moves like that end up in a place like that? And why, when he clearly could have done so much worse, did he stop the instant the danger stopped and drop to his knees to help? That last question spread faster than the fight itself. People who had never heard the name Marcus Duval were typing it into search bars, sharing it, daring each other to find out who he really was. A reporter 2 states over saved the clip and started making phone calls. Inside the walls, none of that was the story yet. Inside, there was only the sound that came next. Marcus had been back on his bunk for less than an hour, his knuckles aching, his mind already circling the price of what he'd done. When the night cracked open, boots in the corridor, a lot of them, moving fast, the metal shriek of the block alarm winding up, red light strobing across the ceiling, and a voice on the speaker, hard and flat. Lock down! Lock down! All units! Cell doors began slamming shut down the tier, one after another, closer and closer. Marcus sat up. Through the bars he saw Ellis Pryor, no longer at his far desk, walking fast now, his face pale and furious. A radio pressed hard against his mouth. And Marcus understood, in the cold, clear way you understand a punch that's already been thrown and can't be taken back, that the 4 men on the floor were going to get to tell their version of this first. The story they told was simple, the way a lie almost always is. By morning, the official account had hardened into something that looked like fact. Inmate Marcus Duval, unprovoked, had ambushed 4 men in the Tier C showers. He was dangerous. He was trained. He had concealed a violent past and detonated without warning. 4 inmates were in the infirmary, one of them with a fractured jaw. The institution had a duty to respond. It didn't matter that the arithmetic made no sense at all. 1 man, 4 attackers, a bolted door, a blind spot chosen on purpose. Nobody in the warden's office stopped to ask why 4 men would corner 1 man in the single room without a camera. They had their paperwork, and the paperwork came from Officer Ellis Pryor, who wrote that he'd heard a disturbance, responded immediately, and found Duval standing over the victims. Victims. That was the word they chose. Rourke played it from a hospital bed, his jaw wired shut, which somehow made him look even more like prey. When the internal review came for his statement, he could barely speak, so he scrawled his account on a notepad in a shaking hand. He came at us. We tried to stop him. He's an animal. He underlined animal twice, pressing so hard the pen nearly tore through. Warden Curtis Vale read the report and made his decision in under a minute. Vale hated 2 things in this world above all others: paperwork and attention. The video had buried him in a flood of both. The fastest way to make it stop, he decided, was to bury the man at the center of it. He signed the order before lunch. They pulled Marcus from his cell and marched him to the special housing unit. Solitary, a concrete box the size of a parking space with a steel door, a slot for a food tray, and a window as wide as a man's hand. 23 hours a day inside. 1 hour, if he was lucky, in a wire cage they called a yard. They told him it was for his own protection. They told him it was pending investigation. They did not tell him how long he would sit on that bunk holding his own silence in both hands, thinking about a woman somewhere past the fences, asking after a son who had just vanished from every phone log and every visitor list. He thought about the promise. He'd kept it for 9 days and broken it in 12 seconds. And the worst part was that he couldn't even tell himself he'd been wrong. He'd had no choice. The truth never seemed to count for much in here. The truth had a fractured jaw and a notepad, and right now, the truth was winning. Outside the walls, the same fight was pulling the whole country apart. The video had made Marcus famous, but fame is a coin, and it always lands on its edge before it falls. For every voice that called him a hero, another called him exactly what Rourke had written in that shaking hand. They didn't know him. They saw 12 seconds of a man in a prison uniform and decided the uniform was the entire story. He was an inmate. He'd put 4 men in the infirmary. Somebody dug up the old robbery conviction and reposted it, stripped of the word alleged, stripped of the grainy footage and the rushed lineup. Just a clean, ugly headline. Viral. Convicted armed robber. The tide turned overnight. People who'd cheered now wrote that they'd been played. The prison said nothing to correct any of it, because silence served them. Let the man be a monster in the public eye, and nobody would think to ask hard questions about a blind spot in the showers. It might have ended right there. A man erased inside a concrete box while the internet scrolled on to the next clip. Except the video had reached one more person. Rosalind Meyer had spent 22 years suing prisons. She ran a small legal aid office with a broken coffee machine and a wall of case files stacked to the ceiling, and she had a lifelong allergy to official stories that arrived too clean and too fast. She watched 12 seconds the way she watched everything, twice, the second time with the sound off, and what she saw was not what the headlines had seen. She saw a man who never once moved forward. She saw counters, not attacks. She saw 4 aggressors and 1 defender, and she saw the defender stop the exact instant he could kneel and check a fallen man's breathing. You did not, in Rosalind Meyer's long and hard experience, get footage like that from an ambush. You got footage like that from a man trying with everything he had not to kill anyone. She drove 4 hours to Holloway Ridge and demanded to see him. They put her in a visiting booth with scratched glass, and when they brought Marcus in, thinner than the video, eyes hollowed out by the box, she introduced herself in a single sentence. "My name is Rosalind Meyer. I think you're being railroaded, and I intend to prove it." Marcus studied her through the smeared glass. He had already taught himself not to hope. "They've got 4 witnesses," he said, "a guard's report, my record, and a phone video that already turned me into the villain." "You have a phone video," Meyer said, "that I can read better than they can." She opened a folder. "Tell me everything. Start with the first night." So he did. The mattress on the floor, the boot print on his mother's face, the letters that stopped coming, the 7 nights, the bolted door, and one detail that made Rosalind Meyer stop writing and slowly look up. "He filmed it himself," she said. "Rourke wanted it recorded," Marcus said, "to humiliate me. To document an execution," she said quietly. "And instead, he documented the opposite." She tapped her pen against her teeth. "But it's still his word against yours on how it started. A jury hears convicted felon attacks 4 men, and they fill in the blanks the lazy way. I need more than the phone. I need the room. I need the 7 nights before it. I need to prove a pattern." "There are no cameras in the showers," Marcus said. "That's why they chose it." "No," Meyer agreed, "but there are cameras everywhere else." She was flipping pages faster now. "The tier, the chow hall, the corridor outside your cell. 7 nights of harassment doesn't leave one piece of footage. It leaves dozens. Mattress on the floor, that's a corridor cam. Commissary, stolen. That's a tier cam." She looked up and something sharpened behind her eyes. "Mr. Duvall, when an institution picks a blind spot this carefully, it isn't because they only own 1 camera. It's because they know exactly what every other camera would show." She filed the request that afternoon. A formal demand for every minute of footage from Tier C across the 7 relevant nights. 3 days later, the prison's response landed on her desk. She read it once and went very still. The footage from the Tier C camera for all 7 nights was gone, logged as down for maintenance. Every single night Rourke's crew had worked, the lens had been dark. Someone had turned it off. A camera turned off on purpose is not the end of a case. To Rosalind Meyer, it was the beginning of one. A missing tape isn't innocence. It's a confession with the words scratched out. She took the maintenance log to a review hearing and stood in front of a panel. Warden Curtis Vale and a state corrections official who had flown in specifically because the video would not stop trending. Vale had wanted this thing kept quiet. Instead, he had a lawyer with a folder, and the whole country pressed against the door. Meyer started gently. She laid out the official story first, in their own words, so everyone in the room could hear exactly how clean it was. Unprovoked, ambush, animal. Then she set the maintenance log on the table. The Tier C camera, she said, failed for 7 consecutive nights. The precise 7 nights my client says he was harassed. Then it recovered the morning after the shower incident and has worked perfectly ever since. She looked at Vale. That is either the most exquisitely timed equipment failure in the history of American corrections or somebody scheduled it. Vale's jaw worked. Equipment fails. It does, Meyer agreed pleasantly, which is exactly why 11 months ago this facility quietly installed a pilot program. Secondary cameras, smaller units, separate wiring, separate hard drives, mounted specifically to cover the blind spots the older system missed. She let that sentence sit in the air. Including the corridor directly outside the Tier C showers. The temperature in the room changed. Against the far wall, Ellis Pryor went absolutely still in a way that everyone noticed. Because Pryor had known the old camera's schedule by heart, he had not known about the new one. Nobody on the floor had. It was a memo he'd never opened, a second eye he'd never accounted for, recording quietly while he sat at the far desk with his back to the tier. Meyer opened her laptop. She did not play the fight. She played the 7 nights. Night 1. A grainy corridor feed, time-stamped. 3 men outside Marcus's cell. A mattress dragged out. A boot coming down on something small and square on the floor. Night 3. Rourke's crew laughing at the mail slot, passing something between them. Night 5. Marcus against the cinder block wall with the phone pressed to his ear, and Rourke leaning in to pat his cheek twice, soft. And the 7th night. The corridor outside the showers. 4 men filing in, Rourke last, reaching back to throw the bolt from the inside. The timestamp read 9:14 p.m. My client, Meyer said quietly, entered that room at 9:13. 4 men followed him in, and one of them locked the door from the inside. You'll notice no one is dragging anyone. You'll notice exactly whose hand turns the lock. She closed the laptop. That is not an ambush by one man. That is an ambush of one man. The corrections official was writing fast now. Vale had stopped pretending to be calm. But Meyer wasn't finished because the panel still had the easy thought sitting in the backs of their minds, the one the headlines had planted there. Convicted felon, trained fighter, even cornered. Didn't he do too much? 4 men in the infirmary, 1 with a shattered jaw. Isn't that the work of someone dangerous? So Rosalind Meyer reached into her folder and pulled out the thing she'd been saving. You keep calling my client trained, she said. Let me tell you exactly how trained. She slid a single sheet across the table. Marcus Duvall, 22 professional fights, 22 wins, 16 by stoppage, state super lightweight champion, nationally ranked before his arrest. She let them read it. This is not a man who learned to swing in a prison yard. This is a professional athlete whose hands are, in the legal sense, registered weapons. Vale frowned. You're making our case. He's dangerous. I'm making the opposite case, Meyer said. And in about 10 seconds, you're going to see why. She played the fight then, once at full speed, then again slowed down frame by frame, the way 100 million people had already watched it. A fighter at his level, she said, narrating over the slow motion, throws a single punch that can end a life. He knows that. It's the first thing anyone teaches you. So watch what he chooses to do with 4 men attacking him in a locked room when he has every legal and moral right to defend himself by any means necessary. She pointed at the screen. First man, a body shot, not the head, the body. Drops him, doesn't injure him permanently. Second man, he redirects the man's own momentum into the wall, 1 short counter. Third man, Mr. Rourke. She froze the frame on the check hook. 1 punch, clean. And then, watch, he could follow up. A man on the ground is a man you can finish. He doesn't. He steps back. She advanced the footage to the final seconds. Marcus, untouched, kneeling beside the second man, 2 fingers at his throat. There it is, Meyer said softly. The most dangerous man in that room, on his knees, making sure the person who came to hurt him is still breathing. She looked at each panel member in turn. A man who wanted to do harm could have crippled 4 people in 12 seconds. He had the skill. He had the right. Instead, he used the exact minimum force required to survive, and then he rendered aid. That is not the record of an animal. That is the most disciplined act of self-defense any of you will ever see on a screen. For a moment, the room was completely silent, the kind of silence Marcus knew intimately, the kind that falls right before a decision. The corrections official turned to Pryor. "Officer, the pilot cameras. Were you aware of them?" Pryor opened his mouth, closed it. The pause was its own answer, and every person in the room heard it. "And where were you?" the official continued. "The night of the incident? During the disturbance?" "At my desk," Pryor said, "doing reports." "With your back to the tier," Meyer added. "We have that on camera, too." It came apart quickly after that, the way these things always do once the first thread gives. The fractured jaw statement collapsed against footage of a man throwing a bolt. The witness accounts, every one of them from Rourke's crew, turned to smoke the moment they were laid beside the timestamps. And an older inmate, a man named Silas Boone, who had stayed silent all this time out of fear, stepped forward now that there was finally something worth stepping toward, and told the panel about 7 nights of cruelty he'd watched from the library window and could not stop. Marcus sat through all of it, without moving. He'd trained himself in the box not to hope. But when the corrections official set down her pen and said the words "pending immediate review of Officer Pryor's conduct and the conditions in Tier C," something in his chest that had been clenched for weeks finally loosened. He thought about his mother, and for the first time he let himself think that he might actually make it home while she was still there to see it. Rosalind Meyer gathered her folder, leaned toward the scratched glass, and said the only thing that mattered. They built their entire case, she told him, on a camera they were certain was off. She almost smiled. They forgot about the one that was watching them. Justice, when it finally decided to move, moved fast. The footage from the pilot cameras went to the State Corrections Board, then to the district attorney, then, inevitably, to the reporters who had been camped outside Holloway Ridge for 2 weeks. The official story did not survive contact with the truth. 7 nights of corridor footage don't lie. A bolted shower door doesn't lie. And a man kneeling to check his attacker's breathing does not lie. Deacon Rourke was charged with 4 counts of felony assault for the ambush he had filmed himself. His own trophy became the case against him. The wired jaw he'd used for sympathy turned out to be the smallest of his problems. He was already serving time for the man he'd nearly killed years before, and the parole he'd been quietly counting on evaporated. The court added years to a sentence he'd believed was almost over. The king of Tier C walked out of that hearing in cuffs, into a silence from the other inmates that was louder and colder than any cheer could have been. Officer Ellis Pryor did not go quietly, but he went. The investigation into the missing footage found exactly what Rosalind Meyer had promised it would: a pattern of arranged blind spots, ignored complaints, and reports written to protect the man who kept the tier quiet. Pryor was stripped of his badge and charged with falsifying official records and willful neglect of duty. The nod he'd given Rourke across a chow hall, the smallest thing a man can do, turned out to be the thing that ended his whole career. Warden Curtis Vale resigned before they could remove him. The man who hated attention above all things, left under the brightest lights of his life, trailed by cameras down the very steps he'd hoped to keep clear. A state monitor was assigned to Holloway Ridge, and the pilot camera program, the one accident that had saved an innocent man, was made permanent and expanded to every block in the facility. And then there was the conviction that had put Marcus inside in the first place. Rosalind Meyer didn't stop at the prison case. She took the old robbery conviction apart, the way she took everything apart, slowly and in daylight. The grainy footage, the rushed lineup, the public defender who'd barely opened the file. She tracked down the check-cashing store's original security recording, the full version nobody had bothered to pull, and she found the clerk, and when she finally showed him a clear photograph, he said the words that should have been said 3 years earlier. "That's not him. The man who robbed me was heavier, older. That's not the man." The court vacated Marcus Duvall's conviction on a Thursday morning. Wrongful imprisonment, immediate release. He walked out of Holloway Ridge through the same 3 gates that had swallowed him into a parking lot full of strangers who had followed 12 seconds of his life all the way to this moment. They went quiet as he passed, the way a crowd goes quiet around something it senses is bigger than a photograph. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't make a speech. He just kept walking toward the one car that mattered. His aunt was behind the wheel. The passenger seat was empty, reclined, a blanket folded on it. "She wanted to come," his aunt said, her voice breaking apart. "She made us drive her this far, and then the doctors turned us around. She's at the hospital, Marcus. She's holding on. She's been holding on for exactly this." He made it in time. That was the part that mattered more than the years, more than the badges and the resignations and the cameras. He walked into a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and quiet machines, and he got down on his knees beside the bed where a small woman lay, and she opened her eyes and saw her son. Free. Whole. Home. She lifted one thin hand to his face, to the same cheek that had been slapped in a prison yard a lifetime ago, and she held it there. "I knew," she whispered. "I always knew, baby." He stayed. The story didn't end in that room, though. It had already grown far past him. 12 seconds had become something much larger than a fight. It had become a question the whole country kept asking out loud. How many quiet men are sitting in blind spots right now? How many true stories are buried under clean reports written by the people they protect? Lawmakers cited the case in hearings. A reform bill carried provisions for mandatory camera coverage and independent review of inmate complaints, and people in the papers started calling it the Duvall Rule. Marcus never asked for his name to be on a law. He'd only ever wanted to keep one promise. He'd kept it. He was home. His mother lived another 16 months. Good ones. She was there in a folding chair by the door the day Marcus Duvall opened his gym. It wasn't much at first. A leased space in a rough stretch of the city, a bare concrete floor, a ring he built himself out of second-hand rope and donated canvas. He hung a single sign above the door. No champion's name on it, no logo, just 2 words, "Second round." Because everyone, he said, deserves a second round. Everyone deserves someone in their corner when the first one didn't go the way it should have. The kids came first, the ones the neighborhood had already written off, the ones teachers called trouble and cops called familiar. Marcus never asked about their records. He asked about their footwork. He taught them the one thing he'd learned the hardest possible way, in a place with no cameras. That real strength is the power you decide not to use. Anybody can throw a punch, he told them, over and over until it stuck. It takes a fighter to know when not to. Silas Boone ran the morning sessions. The old trainer made parole 6 months after Marcus walked, and the first phone call he made from the outside was to the gym. He stood in the corner now with his reading glasses and a fresh paperback, barking at teenagers to keep their hands up, and for the first time in 30 years he looked like a man standing in the exact place he was built for. Then came the others, men fresh out, blinking in the daylight, carrying records and reputations and nowhere in particular to go. Marcus handed them mops and gloves and a reason to show up in the morning. Some of them had done time in places like Holloway Ridge. A couple of them had once been Rourkes and were trying not to be anymore. Marcus didn't turn them away. He'd learned that the line between the man on the floor and the man standing over him is thinner than anyone wants to believe, and that mercy, given once, has a way of coming back around. Rosalind Meyer stopped by sometimes between cases. The Duval rule had passed into law in 3 states by then, and she always carried a folder full of other quiet men, in other blind spots, who needed someone to read the footage better than the people who'd buried it. She never ran out of folders, but she said the gym was the only courtroom she'd ever walked into where everybody won. Marcus still trained early, alone, before the kids arrived. He'd wrap his hands the old way, slow, one knuckle at a time, and hit the heavy bag in the gray morning light. And he'd remember. A yard, a slap, a promise made to a woman in a hospital bed. He had walked into that prison a champion nobody knew. He walked out a man everybody did. And somewhere inside a concrete box, in the longest nights of his life, he had decided that if his name was ever going to mean anything at all, it would mean this. A second round for anyone the world had already counted out. That's the story. But before you go, let me ask you the same thing I asked at the very start. Have you ever been underestimated, written off, talked down to, judged by a uniform or a face or a single bad chapter, by people who never once bothered to learn the rest of you? If you have, then you already know exactly what Marcus knew on that mattress on the floor. That being quiet is not the same as being weak. That being kind is not the same as being soft, and that sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is hold a line nobody else can even see. So tell me down in the comments, when has someone underestimated you, and what did you do about it? I read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's quietly holding a line right now that nobody is applauding. And if you want more stories about the overlooked, the counted out, and the quietly unbreakable, subscribe and stay with us. Your corner is right here. I'll be honest with you before I go. I make these stories because I've watched good people get treated like they're nothing, and I've watched the world look the other way while it happened. Marcus isn't real, but that feeling is very real, and a lot of you know it better than you'd ever say out loud. So this one's for everybody who stayed quiet, stayed kind, and never once stopped being strong. I see you. I really do.